Liberated. Well, I do. I very strongly believe in women, and they should be liberated. Wouldn't have it in, huh? Everybody's liberated. Yeah, they all talk back. Nobody pays any attention. I was telling the people in the church in New York last night. I says, well, what we have down there is it's difficult to explain. I said, but nobody belongs to it. We don't have any members, because I don't believe that. And I really think that the most dangerous thing in the universe is groups. Organizations are absolutely dangerous. I made a statement on TV and. About circumcision, and the guy wrote me a letter and he says, well, you can think, but we believe this way. See, there's no way I can talk, because you can't talk to a group. You can't discuss anything with a group, because it doesn't make any difference. Even if you think that I'm telling the truth, if you belong to a group, you're going to be faithful to that group, and you're not going to acknowledge anything. And so we continue. And so there are groups all over the world, and what do? They shoot one another. They drop bombs on one another. It's no good. So here everybody is completely individuated, and a little bit weird, and you think whatever you want to think. And so, do they believe what you say? I say, I hope not. I mean, I don't know, because I don't say anything that I ask you to believe. I'm just opening ideas, ways for people to start thinking. And that's the most critical thing in the world, is to be able to think without pressure from anybody. To say, I see it this way. That's fine. Then that's the way you should see it, because that's the way it's being given to you. And you may not see something the way I do, and you won't see it the way I do. And I'm just trying to open and give you keys as to how you can look at things. Let me tell you something. Right now, in the time of the year we're at with the world and the universe and the earth, is the most magnificent symbol of what every religion in the world is about. Every religion in the world can be summed up in 8 words. The sun goes down. The sun goes up. That's it. You've learned it. You can go home. There isn't any more. That's the key to life. That's the key to everything it is. Everything in the universe. And every one of your mythological saviors, they all went down, they all went up. They all died, they all resurrected. The sun goes down, the sun goes up. You go down, you go up. When the sun goes down, it's dark, it's cold. Things retreat into themselves. When your energy goes down, things become dark, things become cold, things become depressed. You start to retreat into yourself. You'll even start to call it, these were dark days for me. But when the sun goes up, what happens? Just what you see now. If you walk outside, you see the buds coming on the trees. You see little flowers sticking their heads out of the earth, and you see all life starting to come back again, because the sun has risen. The sun has left its tomb and has gone back up. So every story, if it's a Jesus story, if it's an Osiris story, if it's an Attis story, if it's an Adonis story, if it's an Ishtar and Tammuz story, they're all the same. If it's a Krishna story, it's a Buddha story, they go down and they come up, because the sun goes down and the sun comes up. See, there's no fables in here. There's no make-believe in here. Everything is a scientific fact based on the principle of the earth. Based on what happens outside, happens within you. And the story of Joseph and the amazing coat is exactly the same. The story of the amazing coat of Joseph is the story of Jesus. It's the same thing. There's no difference. Look, if you talk about Easter, well, and we're going to do that. That'll be the special message I'll do. But what is it about? It's about a person named Easter, who's spelled I-S-H-T-A-R, who is married to a guy named Tammuz. And Tammuz dies for the people, and he goes down into the netherworld, and Easter has to go down to do what? To bring him back up, and he raises himself out of a gray-colored egg. It's a fact. It's a truth. And that's where it comes from. And it's very difficult for many people to hear things, because their tradition says, well, that's not the way we believe. But the point is, truth should never be difficult for you, no matter whether your tradition gets in the way of it or not. Truth is truth. And so we talk about it. So let's talk about Joseph. And, yes?
Before you go on, do what you did last night, the sun doesn't really go down and go up?
No, the sun doesn't really go down, and the sun doesn't really go up. And that's another thing. When you go watch sunset, you're not watching sunset at all. You're just watching. It isn't that the sun went down, it's the earth turned. So it's all an illusion anyhow, isn't it? It is an illusion. Oh, I'm going to go see sunrise. No, you're not. You're going to see the earth turn. I'm going to watch Earth turn tomorrow morning. Well, then tell it like it is. One of the great things that down in Key West is everybody congregates to see the sunset. You know, oh, the sun went down. The sun didn't move. The sun stayed right there. You spun a little bit. Okay. Let's look at Genesis chapter 39, and I'll show you as we go along with this, and I'll show you how it works. It's on page, what did I say? It's on page 34, I believe. Now we remember that Joseph was sold into slavery. Joseph goes into Egypt. But don't worry about Joseph. Forget about Joseph. Remember, what you've got in your hands is not a history book. You don't have a novel in your hand. You have something that says Bible. When you have something that says Bible, it means it's a mystical book. It's a spiritual book. It's not talking about Joseph. It's talking about you. And if these stories do not relate to you now in 1995, I don't care if they're written 6,000 years ago, I was telling people, this is the greatest thing in the world. Here's the thing in Christianity, with all due respect to it, God bless and all the people and so forth, but you take this holiday called Easter, all right? Easter, and you take it and you talk about death and resurrection, and then you have chicks and bunnies and eggs and hats and all of that stuff. You have taken the holiday that somebody else originated. You took the traditions and the rituals that somebody else wrote. You even took the name, and then you said, it's mine, it's ours, this is our truth. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's like if Margaret Mitchell wrote Gone with the Wind 6,000 years ago, and I came along and said, look at this great book I have. I just wrote it. Gone with the Wind, I'm going to call it, by Bill Donahue. And everybody's going to go to the movie. Oh, this is a girl, boy, hero. And then somebody's going to come along and say, I think there was a story like that 6,000 years ago. Everybody would say, oh, get out of here. You're some kind of nut, and so forth and so on. All we've done is take somebody else's story. And we've made it our own, and we say, look, this is the truth. But I mean, at least I think that we have an onus upon ourselves to be a little original. If we want to have a resurrection story, let's make one up that's original. We didn't even do that. We just copied word for word, line for line, somebody else's story. As I told you, that was a day. Easter, actually, when it originated in Babylon, was a day of fertility cults and sex. And the women used to come to church on that day and act as prostitutes in the temple. All they had to do was wear their Easter bonnet. That was it. And that's the way it was. That's the day that we have placed as our most holy day. And that's the truth. You see, what you have to do when you come in here is not sit and stare at me and say, oh, I don't believe. Go to the library. We have a librarian sitting right here, Sarah Keeper. You can direct him to the different books, can't you? Well, anyhow, they have books in the library. Go read about it. Look it up. Look up the word Easter, and you'll go into shock syndrome if you're a traditionalist, because it'll tell you where it comes from. It's a Babylonian fertility rite, and that's where it comes from. Okay, but look at Joseph on page 40, whatever, was it 39, 34. Genesis chapter 39, okay? And the name of this is Joseph, Jesus, the Son. Joseph, Jesus, the Son. Okay. Joseph in Genesis chapter 39:1 is brought down to Egypt and purchased by Potiphar. Okay. Now we will see Joseph as a form of Jesus. In other words, the stories have tremendous similarities. Joseph is betrayed by his brothers. Jesus is betrayed by his brethren, the disciples. And this is very interesting for you to understand. Take a look, if you would, on page, I guess it's Genesis chapter 37. I think it's page 33. And in Genesis chapter 37, verse 26, look what it says. And Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Let's sell him. Do you see it? Who wanted to sell Joseph? Judah. Okay. Now, if you would open and turn the Bible to page 804 and look at Matthew 26, page 804. And in Matthew 26, look what it said. And in a way, I'm trying to show you the stories are the same. In Matthew chapter 26 on page 804, look what it says in verse 15, or verse 14. One of the 12 called Judas went unto the priest and said, what will you give me if I deliver him unto you? Who wanted to sell Joseph? It was Judah. Who wanted to sell Jesus? It was Judas. Now, here's an interesting thing. Watch this. Take a look at this. You see this word Judas? Word Judas is a Greek rendering of the word Judah. Who sold Joseph? Judah. Who sold Jesus? Judah. It's exactly the same. It's the same story. And Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver. Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver. Because when Jesus was sold, there was a betrayal. The number 30 in Babylonian, in which this comes from, represents the god sin, the emotions. The number 20 represents the god Shamash, which is the sun god, which is actually what Joseph was. So there you have the same story. Joseph was sold by Judah. Jesus is sold by Judah. They both go into a pit. They both resurrect and so forth and so on. It's the same story. And why shouldn't it be the same story? Prior to that it was Mithra, and prior to that it was Adonis, and prior to that it was Attis, and prior to that it was Buddha, and prior to that was Krishna. And they all came down, and they all resurrected. In fact, there's a great story of Buddha as he erects up into the prayer tower and sits at the right hand of the Father. But nobody knows that. Why don't you know it? Because you don't go to the library and read about it, that's all. Because you come into a church and whatever somebody says to you, they say, this is it, this is the truth. This is the truth. This is the Word of God. And we don't dare question the Word of God. Yes, you do. Because Jesus says, seek, ask, knock, look. Don't sit there. So Joseph as a form of Jesus, Jesus is a form of Joseph. Joseph comes from his father's house, which is Jacob. Jesus comes from his father's house, which is God. Okay. And Joseph in Genesis 37:24 is put into the pit. Jesus is put into the tomb. Why is Joseph put into the pit? Why is Jesus put into the tomb? Because in December 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, the sun is put into the tomb of the winter solstice. Why is Jesus in the tomb 3 days and 3 nights? Because on December the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, the sun is entombed in the winter solstice 3 days and 3 nights. That's why. If the sun was in the winter solstice a day and a half, guess what? Jesus would have been in the tomb a day and a half. That's the way it is. And why is Jesus crucified? Because on December the 21st, the sun enters the constellation of the cross and is crucified. If the sun entered Taurus on the shortest day of the year, the story would have been written and he would have been gored by a bull. Do you know one thing? When I was a little kid, I lived in a house where I had a very violent father. I mean, very violent. He got drunk and, I mean, it looked like the gunfight at the OK Corral at our house. I mean, if it wasn't cops there, people were flying through banisters and, I mean, it was bad. Knives and all of this stuff. And then they took me to school. And I sat with nuns in the school. And they told me about my heavenly Father. He just killed his kid. And he was planning an Armageddon, a nuclear holocaust. And he's going to send me to hell with demons and devils. And I said to myself, Self, this guy is worse than the guy you left home. But then I found out that that's not what God is. That God is love. And that God is springtime. And that God is dolphins and bunnies and pussycats and healing and lovely things. And God is people taking each other arm in arm and hand in hand. And God is women, and God is children, and God is stars and trees and beautiful things. And we've never been allowed to know that because we've had to be frightened. We've had to become guilty. We've had to become fearful because being frightened and guilty and fearful obligated us to some group. They were the ones that were going to show us how to get saved. They didn't do that. And every single war that I've seen since I've been alive on this planet, somewhere, some part of it, there's somebody with a religious hang-up that's involved in it. I don't want any part of it. And what happens here? Joseph rises out of the pit. He becomes the second in command in Egypt, and he is in charge of the storehouse of bread. He rises out of the pit to feed nations bread. Jesus rises out of the tomb and becomes the bread of life. And the sun rises out of the solstice and gives life, and wheat grows, and corn grows, and all kinds of things blossom into the earth, and all things are made new because the sun has risen. Why is all this important to you? Because in the center of your abdomen is a place called the solar plexus. It is the place of the sun. And all of these stories are trying to tell you the sun rises outside, Joseph rose, Jesus rose, and the solar energy inside of you must rise up to the Father's house, and summer will come to your life. That's what this whole story's about. And it doesn't cost you a nickel to make it come up. It doesn't make you join anything. You can do it wherever you want. Just discipline yourself to allow that energy to flow upward to the Father's house inside of you. All of this is the sun. All of this is the sun that comes down and the sun that goes up. The tide that goes down and the tide that goes up. The moon that shrinks down and the moon that expands. Everything is in a constant state of involution and evolution, including you. And the reason that you and I have so much trouble in this world is because the sun of our life is down. And it is cold, and it is dark, and it is depressing. And we've got to sit and allow the energy to rise back up to the Father's house and sit at the right side. In Genesis chapter 39:1 on page 34, look what it says. Joseph comes into Egypt, which is the place of the carnal mind. It's the place of bondage. It's the place of all of the things that you've been told that you have. Look. Hey, you want to see some proof of what I'm telling you? When some of you get mad at me because I tell you about Easter and about a bunch of junk. Do you know who Easter's mother is? Do you know Easter's mother's name? Mrs. Easter. Mrs. Easter. There's always one. Are you ready for Easter's mother's name? Here it is. Sin. Look it up. Go in the library, get any mythological book you want to. The mother of Easter is sin. And that's your most holy day on the calendar. It may give you a hint why the world is screwed up. Doesn't anybody pay attention to this? Does anybody ever know this? Does anybody ever read this stuff? No. Absolutely not. Who's your mommy? Oh, her name is Sin. Oh, you're going to have trouble at your house, little girl. Okay. Now Joseph, who is the son, comes into the house of Potiphar. Potiphar's house, and as it says in Genesis 39:1, in the house of Potiphar. He comes into the house of Potiphar, and again we see the solar connection. Now remember I said Joseph represents the sun. Joseph represents the solar energy in you in the same way that Jesus does. But this energy is what is called the pineal gland of the brain. Nothing can happen in your body unless there is a gland involved, unless there is electricity involved. I don't care what anybody has told you. I don't care if it's Billy Graham down to Chiang Kai-shek. There are no gods inside of you. There are no spirits running around inside of you. There are no demons and devils running around inside of you. There might be electricity that is totally out of control and freaking you out. But once you understand how to use that electricity inside of you, then you'll light up your life. If you don't know how to use the electricity that's in this building, you know what you'll do? You'll burn the doggone place down. That's what I would do. If they said, here are these wires, why don't you wire this building? I say, certainly I will wire this building, and the place would burn down because I know nothing about it. But you take an electrician that knows how to handle these wires, and he'll light the place up, and it'll be beautiful, and it'll be warm, and it'll run beautiful. When you know how to use the electricity inside of your brain and inside of your body, you'll heal yourself, and you'll light yourself up. But so far, too many of us have been messing around with these wires, and we don't know what we're doing with them, and we've been burning our heads, and we're frying things up there. And all we ever do is sizzle. And I sizzle all the time. I'm not standing up here telling you that you're bad because you're looking at a prime example. Sure, I meditate, but I also sizzle. And there are times when people say things to me, or things happen, and I freak out because that's the nature of things. You're a human being. This thing of finding God and being saved is out of that circumstance. But as soon as you turn around, there's somebody coming up behind you. So it's the way life is. It's a challenge. It's an adventure. It's overcoming this and overcoming that. And so the pineal gland of the brain is that, look, pineal means pine cone, okay? Down in the bottom of your abdomen is the solar plexus. It's the place of fire, okay? If you go out into, and I'm sounding like you, okay? If you go out into the pine barrens, they have pine cones out there. When the fire when there's a forest fire and it hits the pine cone explodes and the seed goes out of the pine cone and new life comes to the forest. Trees are born, flowers are born, shrubs are born, all pine stuff is born. Why? Because the fire caused the pine cone to explode and release the seeds. Don't you see what's being told to you? When the fire from the solar plexus raises itself through meditation and hits the pineal gland of the sacred pine cone inside of you, that pine cone opens up, the seed flows through you, and new life is born into your body. That's why it's used as that symbol. And remember what René Descartes said. René Descartes was the father of philosophy in France. He said there is one place in the human body where God and soul meet. It's at the pineal gland of the brain. Okay, so here Joseph is the son, and he comes into Potiphar's house. Now, this is an interesting point. What does the word Potiphar mean? I didn't think you'd know that. You don't know that. It means dedicated to, let me look at it myself, Ra. Dedicated to Ra, the sun god. Who is Ra? The sun, the mind. Who is El? From the Bull Mithra cult, the power within, the power. Who is Isis? The feminine principle of spirit. Do you see something? Your name has become Israel. Israel, spirit, mind, power erupting within you. It is the sacred pine cone. It is the fire of the solar plexus. It is you beginning to understand how to use the energy within you because you're instructed how to use it. And we have no excuse because Krishna instructed us exactly the same way that Buddha instructed us. Buddha instructed us the same way that Jesus instructed us. Muhammad went into a cave and told everybody about it. And you know what we've done? We've chosen our hero. And we've got this whole thing down to a science. If you come and sign a card and say, I agree, you're saved. You know absolutely nothing about nature. You know absolutely nothing about your own body, about your own mind, but you've signed a card. And you miss life. There's an interesting part here. It says in Genesis chapter 39, verse 2, and the Lord was with Joseph, and he was prosperous, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Can I tell you something? Can I tell you that there is not one thing in this Bible in which either the law of God, the temple of God, Jesus himself, this story, any story, there is not one story that has an origin of Judeo-Christian heritage. Not one. Every bit of it comes from Iran and Iraq. Oh, I said, tell him what's that? It says God wants to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. Who did he pick? Cyrus. He picked Cyrus. Who was Cyrus? Cyrus was the king of Iran. His God was Ahura Mazda. It says we're going to rewrite the law of the Jews. Who was going to write the law of the Jews? Ezra. Where was Ezra? He was in Babylon. That's Iraq. And what happened? It turns around, it says King Artaxerxes sent forth a decree. And he said, you must listen to Ezra. You must listen to the law as Ezra gives you the law. And where did that come from? It comes from around, and it's time to talk about Jesus, Jesus the Christ. And they turned around and said to Jesus, he's the king. Who said he's the king? The Magi. Where did they come from? Iran. And here's a point here that Joseph, Potiphar is dedicated to Ra, the sun god. He's in the house of the Egyptian. Now look at page 778 in Matthew chapter 2, verse 14. Page 778. Matthew chapter 2. And look what it says in verse 14. It says about Jesus, it says about Joseph, when he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed into Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled, which is said, out of Egypt have I called my son. Joseph takes Mary and Joseph to Egypt. And why? Because it says, out of Egypt have I called my son. And what does it mean, out of Egypt have I called my son? Who is the Egyptian sun god? Amen-Ra is his name. Amen-Ra is the name of the Egyptian sun god. Now, can I in some way say that Jesus is the sun god because I said Joseph is the sun god? Where do I come up with such a thing like that? Well, it just said they took Jesus to Egypt to fulfill the prophecy, out of Egypt I have called my son. Now, look at the name that Jesus gives himself. Look at page 1004. Look at Revelation chapter 3. Revelation chapter 3, and look at verse 14. And look what Jesus calls himself. Look at the name that Jesus calls himself in Revelation chapter 3 and verse 14. And unto the angel of the church of the Laodiceans write, these things say the Amen. He calls himself the sun god. He identifies himself as the sun god. And what does Amen, Jehoshua, the sun god, say? What does he talk about? He talks about the pineal gland of the brain. He talks about that which is within you. And he turns around in Matthew 6:22 and he says, if your eye be single, your body will fill with light. The ancients knew the single eye is the pineal gland of the brain. The single eye is the pineal gland of the brain. It is the pine cones, the pineal gland deep within inside of you. Many people refer to it as the pineal gland. But let me show you something. Look at page 28. Here's Jacob, who was the father of Joseph. Jacob was the father of Joseph. Jacob was the father of the 12 tribes of Israel, the father of the 12 signs of the zodiac. And Jacob identifies this sacred place. Jacob identifies the holy place where he sees God face to face. And look at Genesis chapter 32. It's on page 28. In Genesis chapter 32, look at verse 30. And what does it say? And Jacob named the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face. You don't have to be a professor. You don't have to be a Rhodes Scholar. You just have to be one bit open to what is the reality. What I'm trying to tell you, and I would tell you with all of my heart, you don't have to go to a church. If you don't come here, I freak out, but I'll get over it. But you don't have to go to a church. You don't have to read a book. All you have to do is understand that within you is the universal power to change things, to change life, to change this world from the violent place it's been to the heavenly place it should be. And what is required to allow the sun from the solar plexus to touch the lamb, which is the pineal or pineal gland of the brain, and throw open the right hemisphere of the brain. What is happening right now? Why are the leaves coming out on the trees and why are the flowers blossoming? Because the sun is where? The sun is touching the lamb Aries. And the lamb Aries within you is the pineal gland of the brain. I keep you up. The pineal gland of the brain. And it can't happen. If the sun does not touch Aries at this time of year, there can be no flowers. There can be no summer. There can be no spring. It has to happen. And if the sun within you does not touch the pineal gland, there can be no light. I don't care what you read about. I don't care who counsels you. I don't care where you talk. I don't care what you study. I don't care what you sing. I don't care what books or what records or what documents you have. If the sun energy inside of you does not rise and touch the pineal gland, it's going to be the same as if the sun outside did not rise and touch Aries. There can be no summer. There can be no new light. There can be no new birth. It must happen. You can take all the words I say, you can throw them away, you can throw your books away, and know one thing. The energy here must rise here. If it doesn't, the game's over. And you're kidding yourself by thinking it can happen some other way. It can't. It can't. And that's why it's all designed this way. And if you look outside, and when you go outside of this building, I want you to look around, and I want you to look closely at the trees, and I want you to see that there's new life coming on the trees, and then say to yourself, why is there new life coming on the trees? And then look up and realize that it's because the sun is raised up to Aries, and then you can say inside of yourself, why isn't there new life coming to me? And then say, has the sun risen? Or is the sun still down into the tomb of my lower self? And if it is, then inside of you, it's winter. Inside of me, it's winter. It depends on us. And in Genesis chapter 39, back on page 34, in Genesis chapter 39, back on page 34, it says in verses 3 to 6 that Joseph was well favored in God's sight. You see that? Genesis chapter 39, verse 3. His master saw the Lord was with him. The Lord made all that he did prosper. Joseph found grace in his sight, and so forth. And everything prospered. Now, there's a very important thing here. And I want you to listen to this, and I want you to understand it. I want to erase all of this because it's a very important thing. Okay. Potiphar Okay, Joseph is in Potiphar's house. Joseph represents the son, the Peniel. Potiphar is you and me. When we are dedicated to God, dedicated to the Son, it is our house which is our body. Okay, listen what it says. The son, the pineal gland of the brain. Listen very carefully what it says in Genesis chapter 39 and look at verse 5. It came to pass that from the time that he, Potiphar, had made him, Joseph, overseer in his house and over all he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house. When? When Joseph was in charge of everything, the house was blessed. When the son is in charge of everything, the house is blessed. When the pineal gland of the brain is finally woken up, your body, your mind, your life is blessed. From the time that was active, from the time that Joseph was up here, everything was fine in Joseph. And you know it. You felt it. You've come in. You've meditated. The energy comes up. See, listening to me is a lot of, it's fakakta. Doing it, you got to experience it. It's just like, once in a while, a lot of stuff is like, people go in the Chinese restaurant, and they go to Chinese restaurant. Oh, I went to a Chinese restaurant. What'd you do? I read menu. I know about all this stuff. Snow peas. I know about snow peas. And I know about MSG, all that stuff. Did you eat it? No. I went to the Mexican restaurant. Picture? We meet every Wednesday night at the Mexican restaurant. We study the menu. We don't eat the food. We haven't experienced it. And this is the problem. You've got to experience it. You've got to experience it. So here's the thing. Get the story. Joseph is up. Potiphar's house is blessed. Everything is going well. Inside of you, the activity of the pineal gland is good. Pineal is active because of your meditation. Everything in your body is okay. Things are going pretty well. You're having a good time. Everybody's being nice for a change. You're being nice for a change. Things are looking good. You're going out, getting dates, whatever you're doing. You're going out having fun. Everything's going pretty good. You're feeling good, huh? You're breathing good. You're sleeping good. Things are going pretty good. Everything's good. Everything's going good. Everything's fine. We got everything in order. We've been meditating. The pineal glands are working. Everything's good in that. But what happens? Genesis 39:7. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife Potiphar cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, Joe. What do you say, Joe? Joe. She says, lie with me, Joe. Had it happen, didn't it? Everything was going good, right? We were tuned in. Everything was working. All of a sudden, the emotions which are represented by Potiphar's wife start to raise themselves against us. And we start to feel things. And as we start to feel these things, and now this is perfectly normal. Don't look at this as being abnormal. It's not. It happens to us all. You don't have to look at the person sitting next to you to see if it happens to them, because it happens to you and it happens to me. Every so often, as we think we're going along great, Potiphar's wife speaks inside the house and screws up the whole thing. That's the way it is. The emotions act up and start to pull us down. In Genesis chapter 39, verse 8, and Joseph refuses. You're fighting this feeling inside of yourself. Okay? You're fighting it. You're not giving into it. You're saying, nah, I'm going to meditate. Your head is like a glue factory now, but you're going to meditate. I'm down here, everything's screwed up. But the temptation and the feelings from the lower part become more persistent. Genesis 39:10. Well, look at Genesis 39 first. And I want to show you something very important. It says in Genesis 39:9, there is none greater in this house than I. Neither has he kept me back from anything from me but you. In other words, that which is the eye, that which is the center, will let you and will bless you to have everything in the universe but yourself. The only thing that will destroy you is yourself. It cannot be done by your parents. It cannot be done by the government. It cannot be done by politicians. It cannot be done by anything but yourself. And that's why Joseph said, I can have everything in this house, but there's one thing I can't touch. Do you remember that? Do you remember that from Genesis? Do you remember that from Adam and Eve? There is one thing that I cannot touch. The emotions. Because once you start intercoursing with the emotions, all hell breaks loose. So I can't. Now the temptation becomes more difficult. Look at Genesis verse 39:10. And it came to pass, she spoke to Joseph day by day that he wouldn't listen to her, to lie with her or be with her. You know, it's every day. You know, you're trying and you're trying to keep yourself in control, and you're trying to feel yourself, you know, as far as your relationship with meditation and God is concerned. But you're just feeling this thing. It's all over you. You're getting hot under the collar, and you're just feeling all of this stuff. So the allegory goes on now to the point of the mind's deceit, and the mind is going to trick you. And it happens all the time. And look how the mind tricks as far as the story is concerned in the allegory. Genesis 39, verse 12. Well, look at verse 11. And it came to pass that Joseph went about his house doing business. There was nobody else in the house. You're all by yourself. You're all alone. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled. And he got out. She's there with his shorts in her hand. Joseph wears bikinis. It says, on the back it says JoJo. She's got Joseph's shorts. Joseph is running down the hall in the all together, saying, I won't do it. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to meditate. So there she has Joseph's pants. Now in Genesis chapter 39, verse 13 and 14, watch what happens. It came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and he fled, she called unto the men of her house, and she said, look, you brought in a Hebrew to mock us, and he came in to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. In other words, he tried to rape me, and I've got proof. Here's his pants. He attacked me. Here's his underwear. Thank God I fought him off. I scratched him, and as he ran away, I pulled his shorts. Such is the nature. What happens in the story now is that Potiphar turns around and has Joseph thrown into the dungeon. Boom. You were deceived by your own emotions, and you fell from the higher realms of consciousness down into the dungeon of your own flesh. It was deceived. You were frightened. What is happening in your head is that this constant stress places you on a guilt trip. Yes, he did it. He did it. And this goes on inside of you. Potiphar's wife inside says, you're guilty. You did it. And you feel it. You feel guilty. You're sure you're the one that caused all of this trouble. Absolutely positive. There's always a conspiracy in the mind against spirit when you're active in something like that. Because now your mind is accusing you of all of these types of different things that you've done. It doesn't have anything to do with this. It can be anything that you are involved in your life. It can be your kids. It can be your family. It can be your job. It can be anything. But now you feel that you're the one responsible. You're the one that caused all of this crap to happen. Because your mind has tricked you. And the reason your mind has tricked you is because there was a time when you were found all alone and you were involved in the talk of your mind. You were cut off from the meditation, and your mind got a hold of you and hung on to you, and you were done. See? It's shown in the Jesus story. It says in Matthew 22:15 that the Pharisees went around and hold counsel how they might entangle. The mind confuses you. The mind accuses you. Here Joseph was innocent, but he winds up in prison. Here you are innocent. I am innocent. And we all wind up in a depression. And when you get out of the depression, you find out that you didn't do anything in the first place to cause it. But you still were in the dungeon. You still were in the dungeon. And I don't care if you're 16 years old, if you're 86 years old. When that happens, when the emotions start to come after you, you'll drop. I don't care how much you're meditating or how good you think you are, you'll drop right down into the dungeon. And it doesn't make any difference if you're the Pope or if you're a pauper. They all drop just the same. Only thing is, when the Pope drops, he drops out of sight. He closes the blinds and he's... I had a great story. This guy said, get this, the guy's name was Charlie. And Charlie says, I know everybody in entertainment, I know everybody everywhere. He says, like that. And they went to Hollywood and Kirk Douglas was there and he walked up to Kirk Douglas and he says, hey Kirk. Kirk says, hey Charlie. The guy said, geez, he knows Kirk Douglas. This is terrific. And he goes and they go on a trip and they go across the country and he goes up there to see Mayor Giuliani. And Mayor Giuliani's talking and hey, Mayor Giuliani looks down and says, hey, Charlie. They go over to the Vatican. And he says, you know everybody. You don't know the Pope, do you? Certainly I know the Pope. And he goes up. The Pope comes out on his balcony, and there's Charlie standing next to him. And the guy turns around. He says to this guy, he says, I never saw anything like that. Look on the balcony. And the guy next to him says, yeah, who the heck is that standing with Charlie? Oink, oink, oink. Okay, real quick, because we wrap it up. We got to get out of here. In Genesis 39, verses 21 to 23, Joseph is in prison. Now, this is the good part. You have fallen. We all fall. Let me tell you something. When you're high as a kite because of your meditation, the pineal gland is operating okay. Your shorts are going to be pulled off by your Potiphar's wife. It's going to happen to everybody. You're going to dump yourself down into the prison of your life. That's the way it is. You know, that's the way it's going to be. You may not have any shorts on, but still and all, I want you to know something. Do you know what just happened? This is just another point of Jesus going into the tomb. It's another point of the sun going down. But this is the important point. When Joseph was in prison, it said the Lord was with him there, and the keeper of the prison committed. Whatever went on in the prison, it says it went through Joseph. So here's Joseph in Potiphar's house, and everything was entrusted to him. Joseph was down in prison, and everything was entrusted to him. What is being said to you? Yes, the son of your life has gone down, but I will tell you, I am with you, and the son of your life will come back up. You're not deserted. You're not abandoned because you're in a depression. You're not deserted. You're not abandoned because you're in the pits. That same God that puts his and her arms around you when you're up there has his and her arms around you when you're down there. And it is just a matter of time until that sun within you will rise again. That's the beautiful part of this story. See? That mind that is God does not leave during your times of depression. You may think it does, but when you come out of that prison, you'll know that, Jesus. But you know why I get excited? Because this is true stuff. This is right. This is real. This is true. And that's why it's exciting to me. It is extremely exciting to me, and I get very emotional about it because it is a positive, loving, wonderful, caring creation of the male and female character of God, assuring you, I know you're going to fall. I know you're going to go down into the pits, and I'm going to go down here with you, and together we're going to work it, and we're going to fight our way back up. And you'll see in the story of Joseph that he comes back up, and he raises himself to that place where he brings his whole family with him. And so Joseph is that part of you as the sun. It goes down, but it'll come up. And the sun goes down to the winter solstice. And when you see in December 21st, when it gets dark at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, think of Joseph in the pit, in the prison. Think of Jesus in the tomb. And just understand that 3 days and 3 nights later on December 25th, that sun is going to rise. And understand that when you're in the tomb, when you're in the pit, that same God is with you. And that just in that short period of time, you're going to rise right back up to the top. You're going to rise right back up to the top. This is the sun in the sky. This is the Jesus in the tomb. This is the Joseph of the coat of many colors. You got it? Say yes. Yes. Makes me feel good. Thank you. And John will come on.